Good morning, Boker Tov, on this fine Sunday, as we are also getting ready for Hanukkah. Today is also a special Chassidic holiday called Yutes Kislev. Maybe we'll talk about it. The title, Chassidic Jews marching with Chamas and Iran, that is probably one of the most often questions I get when the media that loves, of course, to focus on that which grabs attention. I guess to some extent they have that right. That's what news is about. Anytime there is maybe three Hasidic-looking Jews marching, for Hamas, Free Palestine, and so on, they will focus on those Hasidic Jews. And I say supposed Hasidic. We'll find out in a moment who and what their origins are. And I've often gotten questions, knowing that Chabad is also a Hasidic group. It's very common that I get questions. Who are they? Who do they represent? How is that possible? How could they march with Hamas? How could they travel to Iran, meet Ahmadinejad or other Iran leaders and so on? And people are incensed, puzzled. Puzzled is not the right word. Totally dumbfounded. What's happening? Who are these? Are these people dressed up? I mean, is this undercover Hamasniks? I mean, what's going on over here? So I want to discuss this a little bit within the context, of course, of the Torah portion, because this is a Parsha class. It's a class on the Torah portion. We'll talk about that. We'll see how much time we have. I want to maybe connect it with Yutes Kislev, which is the Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, of Chabad Chassidus, of the teachings of Jewish mysticism. And it does tie in together, as we will attempt, with Hashem's help, with God Almighty's help, to elaborate. So we have, I think, a good discussion. Part of the discussion was inspired by the Parsha, and also there is a podcast called Halacha Headlines by Rabbi David Lichtenstein, and the topic this past week was on this, not this group exclusively, but it's definitely part of it, and it was a very interesting podcast. So we will have a little discussion on the issue. We always start with some tzedakah, so we're going to put in some coins in the tzedakah pushka so that we do a mitzvah, and we also elicit God's help in having success in presenting the Torah thoughts in a blessed and inspiring and positive way. So we always start with a bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh bidbaro. So where do we begin over here? When you study, when you learn, and when you read or you want to find out about a group of people, in today's day and age, where a lot of it, the attention span is very short, and we don't necessarily spend a lot of time thinking, we immediately form an opinion without really much thorough knowledge or even understanding the position, the logic, the reasoning of someone who we disagree with. But how can we disagree if we don't really know what they stand for, what their logic is, what their reasoning, what their approach is? So to be truly in opposition of something, you need to understand it. Now, sometimes you don't want to understand it, and I don't need to understand it. That's fine. There are times that you don't need to. I don't need to understand it. My life is good, and so on. But today's class is where we do want to understand a little bit and know both the origin, history, lesson from both the Parsha and this group of people that somehow gets rightfully so under our skin, and not only under our skin, that we are totally can't understand. How can Jews think this way? So let me try to give a little history. Let me give a little understanding in what is the roots of this movement, which is referred to as, or called, they are called the Neturei Karta. I will try to explain. I will also explain it by understanding. You could ask, rightfully so, why are we even spending time having that discussion? Is it just because they grab attention? I mean, who says we need to focus on that and give them even more attention? Perhaps we should totally ignore. And sometimes we should, but there is lessons to be learned. There are lessons to be learned. Again, also within the Parsha discussion, the Torah reading of this past week, Parshat Vayishlach. Let's try to get there, okay? So, the name of this group is called Neturei Karta. Neturei Karta is an Aramaic sentence or two words over here from the Talmud, and its translation is the guardians, those who watch. Neturah means a guard, someone who watches. Karta of the city. And in this context, it is meant that they are the guardians of the holy city of Jerusalem. And let's analyze the origins of how this came to be. Now, I want to tell you that although most think that they are Chassidic Jews, they are actually not Chassidic Jews. They actually are primarily Lithuanian. They are students of the famous and holy and righteous Gra, the Gaon of Rabbi Leo of Vilna. That's where they have their sort of origins from in terms of where they go back in terms of their leadership. Although the group was developed, meaning their teachers are from the students of the Gra. The group was developed, I believe, in the early 30s by a individual or two individuals by the name of Rabbi Amram Bloy and Rabbi Katzenellenbogen. And they developed this group. So even though the reason why we think of them as Hasidim is because they dress like Hasidim in terms of the shtreimel, the fur hat, and what's called the bekeshe. But some of you might not be aware that many, what we call Lithuanian Jews that have established their communities in Jerusalem dress, what we might call Yerushalmis, dress very similar to many of the Hasidic groups throughout the world. So they are not actually a Hasidic group. They follow the customs of the Gra, which is what we more commonly refer to is either as a Litvish or a Misnagdish group as opposed to Hasidic group. So that's a little history. Now, today they are sometimes or often associated with this Satmar group. The Satmar, which its headquarters is, of course, in Williamsburg. It's probably the largest concentrated Hasidic group in one place, in Brooklyn or Williamsburg. Actually, it's not just in Williamsburg. They're also in, I believe, upstate New York. I think it's in Mount Kisco, because there's two brothers who have both become rebbes in their own right. So they have these two groups. They've been divided into two groups. Okay. But they are associated with Satmar often because both have adopted a strong anti-Zionist position. In the 1930s, Rav Amram Bloy, Rav Katzenellenbogen, have taken on a very, very strong anti-Zionist ideology, position, and so on. Let me explain that for a moment. And again, I always like to stay positive. I don't like to really highlight the negativity of fellow Jews. But I think, again, it's good to learn about this so you're more educated. And there are lessons to be learned. Why is it that this group, and again, they're associated often with Satmar, but Satmar has actually distanced themselves very clearly from this group. Let me explain what was their reason for anti-Zionism, and they're not the only ones that were anti-Zionistic in its original. When I say anti-Zionism, I mean the Zionism of the late 1800s, the early 19th or early 20th century, and the early 1900s. For many of you, which to a large extent has a different definition, or definitely in the street type definition rather than maybe on the ideological definition. Today, Zionism means to a large extent different than what it meant 80 years ago, 100 years ago, and so on. The early Zionist movement, there was dominated by the anti-religious thinking, meaning there were many early Zionists, not all, many of the early Zionists were of the opinion that what we need to do to unite the Jewish people is to focus on the land and perhaps Jewish culture, but play down the Torah religious aspect, the religious dimension of Judaism and Jews. So understandably, many, not only Neturei Karta, many Gedolei Yisrael, many Jewish leaders were very weary or openly opposed to the Zionistic movement of that time. And there were two major reasons, maybe three major reasons. Let me explain what their reasons were. And again, I making it very clear that I am explaining their reasons, and we will get to today and what the applications or implications of that are, and so on. So they had several concerns or strong positions, open opposition. One is that the threat to Jewish observance, to Torah mitzvahs, that's who we are. Israel is not Israel without Torah, without holiness, without Judaism, which is correct, whichever way you look at it. Part of the problem of accusing us of occupation is when you view Israel as something that just began in 1948, as opposed to the land promised us by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So that was one concern. Another concern was that there's a Talmudic Agadaic teaching. Agadaic means from the homiletical part of the Talmud. The Talmud has the halacha side, Jewish legal law, and the Talmud has the Agadah, the homiletic, midrashic interpretation, which is, of course, true. It's part of Torah, but it's not necessarily meant to be implemented into Jewish law. Okay? Now, there is a Talmud. It's a famous Talmud, where the Talmud says that God put upon us and the nations of the world, the Gentiles, 3 oaths, 3 promises, 3 shvuot. One was, not necessarily in the order, one was that we will not shelo ya'alu b'choma, we will not storm the walls, the city walls, to reconquer Israel once we were sent into exile, until Mashiach, until the redemption promised by the prophets through the coming of Mashiach. We will not conquer the land. Number 2 was that we won't overpush the coming of Mashiach, which has its own discussions. We're not going to elaborate on that today, as commentaries discuss it. And number 3, that the nations of the world, this was the oath placed upon them, the nations of the world will not subjugate us to too strong of persecution and so on. So these are known as the Gimel Shvuot, the 3 oaths that are mentioned in the Talmud, in Tractate Ketuvot, as an Agadaic teachings. Now the Satmars and the Neturei Karta, and other groups took these three oaths as binding to Jewish law, that until Mashiach comes, until the actual final redemption promised in the prophets, we are not allowed to conquer the land of Israel. We are meant to be in diaspora because of the sins and the destruction of the temple, of the first and second temple. So, and by doing so, by conquering that, you could live in Israel, but you can't conquer it. You cannot conquer it. You cannot govern it because we are in exile. The next Jewish government would have to be under Mashiach, under Messiah. And by conquering the land, you're actually going against God's will. And going against God's will, this is their position. By conquering the land of Israel, you're going against God's will. This, I'm not telling sort of our enemies any secrets. This is published. This is known as their position. You can look it up on the internet. It's all over the place. So I'm not giving away any secrets or giving sort of a sword in the hand of our enemies. Therefore, they believe that would we not have gone ahead and conquered the land of Israel, we would have been able to live in Israel peacefully. Again, this is what they believe, peacefully under the sovereignty, whether it was during the times of the Turks or under the sovereignty of Arabs. We would have been able to live there peacefully and could have our yeshivot and have whatever we want to have, and we would not have any issues or any problems or any pogroms. In their opinion, the pogroms primarily started once we started this movement of reconquering, of going back to Israel in the late 80s, late 1800s, and in the early 1900s and so on. This is sort of the gist of their opinion. I believe I'm summarizing it correctly. So, where does this lead us today? Now, today we have various groups that have adopted some of this thinking, most not. So there are those who are of the opinion that before 1948, we would, let me tell you some of the sort of counter opinions. Now, just in the Jewish world, in the religious Jewish world, in the halachic, I'm not talking about sort of in the political echelon, the secular Jewish world, saying what are some of the counter opinions to this position. You know, it's a Talmud. It's a valid concern, you know, to conquer the land, or to have a land which does not go hand in hand with having Torah and mitzvahs and so on. What is the counter to that theologically or Jewish thought-wise? So two of the main answers that I've seen and heard, and there's books written on this. There are books written on this by the Satmar Rebbe and responses and so on, but just to educate ourselves to some of the basic points here. So the answer to two of these points, one about the concern about the three oaths. So there's been two answers to that. Two answers to that are given in commentaries, in Torah commentaries, in response to that position was, number one, it's a Haggadaic part of the Torah. It's not the law part of the Torah. And the evidence to that is we do not find it brought down in Jewish law. Many statements of the Talmud, not many, all of Jewish law origins are found in the Talmud. We don't find this to be taken as law. Number two is that and the second answer that's, in fact, let me back up. There's the famous Ramban, Nachmanides, one of the greatest authorities on Torah, says that even today in exile, it is a biblical mitzvah to live in Israel. Would the Ramban be concerned about the oath that the Talmud mentions on a halachic level, he surely would have mentioned and said, well, it's a problem, might be a mitzvah, but we have the oath of the Talmud. He does not, and he strongly is of the opinion that it's a biblical mitzvah today to live and to settle into the Holy Land. That's one explanation and answer. Number two is that, yes, there are three oaths. But the reason why the Talmud tells us there are three oaths together, because they go hand in hand, which means that when are we bound, when are we obligated to keep the oath of not conquering the land? We are obligated to do so as long as the nations keep their part of the oath, which is not to persecute us harshly. They have sadly and tragically, as we know, persecuted us beyond harshly, cruelly and viciously. So we do not have to keep our side of the oath, even if you take the position that these three oaths are binding. There are other explanations, other discussions, that essentially we did not take up arms in 1948. In 1948, it was the nations of the world, the UN, that got together. They gave us the land. The arms that we took up was only in defense of them attacking us. So these are the discussions back and forth. Many have taken the position as well that this is only before 1948, when we did not govern our ancestral homeland. And then the discussion can be had, were we allowed to do it or not? But now that we do own the land and it is ours, we definitely do not have the right to give it back. And that has been predominantly the position of the Rebbe, of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, that you could have discussion before, but now that it is our land, we are forbidden to give back any part of land, both for the holiness of Israel and even more importantly, that by doing so, you will be endangering the safety of those living on the Holy Land. And that's been mostly the position of the Rebbe, that now that we do, and God has miraculously given us the land, the discussion whether we were allowed to or not is mute, because now we have it. It's been given to us by God. We have to hold on to it, every inch of it. Okay? This, I think, sums up a little bit the positions over here. Is that clear? Give me a thumbs up if it's clear. If it's not clear, later on you can listen to it again. If you have any questions, you're welcome to post a question over here. And if I have a chance, I notice, and I think I can answer, I will answer. Let's move on. We still have the question. You could be opposed. You could be opposed to Zionism. You could be opposed to whether we're allowed to conquer the land. That's a far distance of marching with Chamas, of marching with Iran. So let me put that question on the shelf for a moment, and let's go to the Parsha. To the Parsha, last week's portion, we read something that many have difficulty with. Many have difficulty with the story. And again, because although Sunday we spend time studying, we still have some time limitations. The story of the Parsha last week, again, many of you know the story, some don't, so I'll just give a short recap. The story is about Jacob, the third of the forefathers, the one who gave birth, of course, with Rachel and Leah, Bilhah, Zilpah, the four matriarchs. The four matriarchs are usually Sarah, Rivka. Bilhah and Zilpah are sort of an extension of Rachel and Leah. They were their maidservants, and we read in the parsha the development of the tribes of the Jewish nation and so on. And over there we have the story of Yaakov coming to Shechem, which today is known as Shechem, and it's also known as Nablus. And he comes to Shechem, he settles there for a short while, and over there we find, horrifically, the first Jewish hostage, so much related to the times and the struggles that we're in. We find the first Jewish hostage. Who is the first Jewish hostage? Dinah, Yaakov's daughter. And the Torah gives us detail that she was taken hostage, she was kidnapped by Shechem, And and in detail, the Torah goes on to tell us how incensed and how outraged the brothers and Jacob were for this terrible act, and because Shem went ahead and kidnapped and raped Dinah. And the Torah tells us that Shimon and Levi, after convincing the city, because Shem says to his the brothers, together he brings his father along, and he says to the tribes, he says, I've fallen in love with your sister, with your daughter, and I'd love to marry her. And they tell him, okay, not a problem, as long as you convince the entire city to go ahead and circumcise. The Torah tells us that then, once they were circumcised, Shimon and Levi went ahead and they slaughtered the entire city, and they took Dinah back. Well, obviously, there's two obviouslies over here. There's an obvious question that the commentaries deal with, and the differences of opinions. Was Shimon and Levi right for what they did? How do you destroy an entire city just because they took Dinah? They took their sister. Why don't you just kill Shem, Hamor, his father, and take your sister? Commentaries struggle. And the two opposing opinions, the two famous opposing opinions from the early commentators is the Rambam and the Ramban. The Rambam, Moshe ben Maimon, the famous Rambam, and Ramban, maybe a little less famous, but also famous commentary. And I will actually read to you from this new Chumash that came out, which is a wonderful Bible with commentaries. And in here, he brings and he quotes, or he brings to us both the Rambam's opinion and the Ramban's opinion. Now, of whether the brothers, what they did was right, was it wrong, what should have happened over here. And interestingly enough, also, Yaakov's response after they killed the city of Shechem is also kind of strange. It's almost like he condemns them but doesn't condemn them. It's like a half-hearted condemnation. So it's a little bit hard to know what's going on here. Is Yaakov happy with what they did, or is he not happy? So let me read over here. Give me a moment over here. Let me find it as we're turning the pages over here. Parshat Vayishlach. Stay with me. Oh, here we go. Here we go. So here we are. Okay, I'm reading over here. Okay, so bear with me. And of course, it has relevance to what's happening now. There's the constant discussion, condemnation, maybe even internal struggle. If what we're doing in Gaza, so many deaths, are we right? Are we wrong? The Torah is, as always, the eternal word of God is so relevant. You just have to figure out whether there are nuances that separate one case in terms of applying it to a given case that you want to apply it. But nevertheless, this seems so similar to what we're going through today. Hostage taken, Dinah, and the brothers kill out the entire city. Innocent civilians, yes, no. Okay, so listen to what the commentaries over here, okay? There's much discussion amongst the commentaries regarding the justification for Simeon or Shimon and Levi's deed. Which deed? The killing out the entire city for retaliation of kidnapping and raping their sister Dinah. As well as on the question of whether Jacob, their father, who rebukes them for it, objected to the action itself or only to the deceitful manner in which they did it. Because remember, they convinced, and Jacob was in that plot, they convinced the city of Shechem to go ahead and circumcise, which weakened them and enabled Shimon, and also made them think that they want to accept their offer of allowing Dinah to marry Shechem, and then they'll merge as one people, and so on, as the Torah elaborates. And so where was Yaakov and Jacob in all this? Where was Yaakov in all this? Okay. Now, so here we go. We have like this. The Maimonides, I'm going to read to you Maimonides. Maimonides says like this. Included, this is a translation, in the 7 universal Noahide laws, that's called the Sheva Mitzvot of Bnei Noach. There are 7 mitzvot that the Talmud tells us that were given to the children of Noach, to the Gentiles who are not Jewish. They still have 7 commandments. It's called the 7 Noahide laws. So says Maimonides, is the commandment to establish courts of justice. This is an obligation to seat judges and magistrates in every district to rule on the other 6 laws and to enforce their observance on the people. Maimonides continues, a Gentile who is found guilty of transgressing any of these laws receives capital punishment. For this reason, all of the inhabitants of Shechem deserve to be killed, says Maimonides, because they saw and knew that Shechem had abducted Dinah and did not bring him to justice. So Maimonides makes his position clear that the reason that Shimon and Levi went ahead and killed out the entire city of Shechem was totally correct, based on the fact that the city was not only complicit, meaning by the very fact that they did not take action, they did not stop it, they did not enforce basic laws of sexual morality, and raping someone is one of the 7 Noahide laws. By not enforcing that, by not enforcing the law, they become part of the crime. This is the way Maimonides understands the verse. However, and I want to go a little further, just here from the footnote on the bottom. The Radak, another of the known commentaries, also writes, even if you're maybe a little uncomfortable with the Rambam's sort of broad conclusion or broad reasoning here, so the Radak adds that Shimon and Levi, now this is not in the verse, but this is what the Radak says, that Shimon and Levi saw the inhabitants of deserving the death because, and here he quotes, many witnessed Shechem's taking her by force and did not intervene. Or Achaim posits that the people of the city not only allowed the outrage, but actively abetted Shechem's abduction of Dinah and rallied to his aid when Shimon and Levi came to free her and punish her violator. This, says the Or HaChaim, is very interesting because it says they killed the city, they killed the family, and then they killed, in which first the people, then Shechem and Hamor, and only then was Dinah removed. So the Or HaChaim, also known commentary, says the reason why the Torah gives us this order, they killed the city, they killed Shechem, and then they took Dinah, is to tell us that they had to go that way because the rest of the city was protecting Shechem. So by protecting Shechem, they are part of that crime. So this is the Maimonides position and those who are sort of with him in that explanation of the verse. How would you apply that to the current Gaza situation? Are what some claim innocent civilians, are they innocent? Are they obligated to root out Chamas? And if not, are they to be held liable for the crimes of Chamas? Perhaps it would make a difference also according to how broad or how limited you view the Rambam. Now, the Rambam makes no conditions. The Rambam seems to tell us that there's sort of collective responsibility, even if you are not helping, assisting, abetting in any way, you're still held liable because it's your job, it's your responsibility, your moral responsibility to have a court and to stop what's going on, especially that Hamas was voted in. If you take maybe the more limited view, which both the Radak and the Or HaChaim limit the Rambam's position a little bit, saying, well, they actually assisted and they helped, then we have to ask ourselves, are the civilians in Gaza, actually helping, or are they prisoners themselves? So that's a discussion. Maybe we'll come back to it. Now, let's take the opposing view here on this discussion, on this Torah discussion. Listen to me. Let me find it. Okay, here we go to, stay with me, please. I'm just looking this very, very quickly. By the way, I want to tell you something. One of the commentaries goes even further, and if you go further, that limits it even more. He says the city in the Torah uses the city which has defiled their sister. So the Torah's words, everything is exact. He looks at those words and says that they all actually defiled a sister. It wasn't only Shem. So he says, so okay, let's leave that position. Let's go further. Nachmanides, while not accepting Maimonides' argument, he says the following. He says that Nachmanides says Shimon and Levi acted not as executioner, but as avenger. This is his honor, and Jacob indeed chastised them. Nachmanides says that it was wrong. Shimon and Levi had no right to kill the entire city. He says they maybe deserve death for other crimes, but not for this particular crime. They don't bear responsibility for what Shem did. I might be confusing always the name Shem. Hold on a second. Shem. I think it was actually Chamor. Chamor, Shem. No, sorry, Shem. I'm right. I'm sorry. Now, so here we have Maimonides and we have Nachmanides. I hope you're still with me and I haven't lost you in some of the technicalities. But later on, listen to this. This is kind of strange, and this is where I'm going to sort of bring it all together. So later on, after this whole thing happens, Jacob says, it's very strange. Jacob says, Vayomer Yaakov, and Jacob says to Shimon and Levi, you have sullied me to putrefy me among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites, and among the Perizzites, and I am few in person, they will converge upon me and smite me, and I will be destroyed. And I am my household. And they responded. They said the following. They said, should our sister be made as a harlot? So Yaakov gives a very strange and soft condemnation. You've sullied me. He didn't say, you murderers, how could you kill an entire city? And then they respond and said, should we allow our sister to be a harlot? Yaakov's doesn't even respond to that. It's seems like almost like I need to critique them, but it's a soft critique. And commentaries talk about that, whether it's according to the Rambam and Maimonides. So I want to draw this discussion to conclusion. So, as we've discussed throughout this time, what's going on in Gaza, may God protect our brothers and sisters wherever they may be. Regardless if you take Maimonides' position over here, or you take Nachmanides' position over here, whether Shimon and Levi was right or wrong, the Gaza situation is different in a very clear way, as I'll explain in a moment. Jacob, whether he condemned them or not, meaning whether he felt they were wrong or not, is also another discussion over here. Now, not another discussion, it's part of the discussion, sorry. One of the commentaries reconciles, and this is the message, and relates to our discussion, and it relates to Yutas Kislev, today, the Rosh Hashanah Chassidus. One of the commentaries explains the following. The reason why we find a half condemnation of Jacob, so he says like this, Jacob agreed with Shimon and Levi in what they did. Whether you take Maimonides in the broad sense, or you take in the more narrower sense, because the rest of the city actually assisted, or even committed the crime, he accepted what Shimon and Levi did. He didn't think they were wrong. This is what one of the commentaries explains. Again, there are 70 facets, at least, to learn each part of the Torah. But he was concerned either that they did it not in a straight way, they did it in a conniving way. If you believe they deserve death, have a court case and go ahead and do what you got to do, rather than this trick of having them be circumcised. There's like a sad diaspora type Jewish joke that the reason why the children of Jacob asked them to circumcise first before they killed them is because nobody cares when Jewish blood is being spilled. So they said, go ahead, convert by having a bris, by having a circumcision, and now nobody will care that you're being killed. Okay, that's a sad joke, and that's, talks about a history of us, but that's not the valid explanation over here, of course. Now, this commentary, and this is what I want to focus on, tells us that what Jacob was upset is not so much the actual deed, because he agreed with them, but what Jacob was upset was he was concerned that Shimon and Levi specifically did not do it only because they were avenging their sister, but because they had, because they had within them a streak of meanness. They had within them a streak of what's called in Hebrew achzoriyut, a streak of cruelness. Because we see later when Joseph is sold, who is involved in the selling Shimon and Levi. Later on, towards the end of his life, what does Yaakov say? He curses Orur Apam, he curses the temper of Shimon and Levi. When you do something, especially if you do something loving and you make a mistake, you make a mistake. But when you do something that is harsh to the extent that you're killing, but if it's in your character, the danger of overstepping or directing it where it doesn't deserve is immense. You're not just dealing with small stuff, offending somebody. So that's why Yaakov goes ahead and he curses their temper. That's what he's concerned about. And therefore, when they respond, Hachazona Yasa Esachosenu, shall we make her into a harlot? He doesn't respond because he is convinced at that moment that they did it for the right reasons, that they did it solely to protect, not because they're cruel. So here is the issue going back to our initial discussion. Yutes Kislev is the Rosh Hashanah for Chassidus. Rosh Hashanah for Chassidus, the unique aspect of Chassidus is it shows the inner core, the essence of everything. There is another underlying important sort of fundamental approach that differs when you learn Chassidus. So welcome back. Continuing the class, I apologize. It was apparently some app that was draining my battery and it just shut down. So I want to continue the thoughts of the class and move on. So as mentioned, I might repeat something because my train of thought was interrupted. This Yaakov's concern, according to this commentary, was the motivation behind, not so much the act. The motivation might come from cruelty rather than just doing the right thing. And now circling back to the beginning of our discussion, and as it relates to this group and the lessons for us to be learned. The Yutes Kislev, the Rosh Hashanah Chassidus, gives us deeper insight and to see the soul, the inner dimension of things. When you view things from that perspective, you see it from a truer and more positive perspective. And therefore, what has happened tragically, see, when you do an act of kindness, if you make a mistake and you're kind, it's sometimes hurtful and not appropriate, but most often it is, at least you've done something kind. When you are harsh and you are not only harsh, but when you support killers and so on, and you're making a mistake, you're doing it because you have gone off the deep end, you've strayed from the proper path, then it becomes extremely harmful. So what has happened over here with this group is that while in its origin they were of the belief that we are not to conquer the land of Israel till Mashiach comes, unfortunately and tragically, it has developed in them this kanaut, this zealousness, in a direction which has become extremely destructive and totally out of the Jewish fold, where even those who have in the past maybe agreed with them, but once it comes to a place where you march and support Iran, which are killers of Jews, killers of all good people, not only Jews, but you march and support, then your ideology as perhaps become more a part of your nature and a part of, and a demonstration of your personal character or personal zealousness rather than representing holiness and goodness. And that is the lesson to be learned over here, amongst other lessons. One lesson is you must always be anchored with a proper and true holy leader and teacher, especially when you're taking up arms and you're and you are going to war and so on. That's why before we went to war, there was very strict guidelines of how and when. We have to be so careful in whatever we do, especially when we do something harsh to a fellow human being, that we have to really strongly question ourselves and make sure that it's guided in a place of holiness, of righteousness, which is why we struggle so much in how we respond to even acts of terror. Now, I want to say that the story in Gaza is very different than the story of Shechem and Dinah, because here we are literally being attacked and civilians are being used as shields, which is a whole different parsha, we would say. It's a whole different story. And you have every right to fully defend yourself, and the blood is on the hands of those who are using the human shields. But the lessons are to be learned here are clear. Number one, when you are doing harshness, when you're hurting, when you are killing, you have to make sure that you are on a very, very strong, moral, godly, holy path. And even when it goes to a lesser extent, give me just one moment, please. I am sorry for interrupting again. Just a second. To even lesser extent, when you are going ahead and you are, in other words, it doesn't only have to go to war. Anytime you are critiquing somebody, anytime you are being harsh with somebody, you have to be on stronger footing and ground and really evaluate, is this coming just from my personality to feel good to put someone else down, or is it coming from a place of goodness, holiness, genuine care, be it my child, be it my student, be it a friend, be it just anybody? You really have to ask yourself that question. And if not, you don't know the damage you could do to another human being. How much more so, of course, when it comes to war and so on. And that's a really important lesson that we need to be learned over here. We also, another lesson is that not everybody who is an expression called a Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination dressed up like a rabbi, like a chassid, and not everybody who goes out there and looks the holy part is holy. Sometimes they're as unholy and as guilty as the most unholy, in some ways even worse, because they represent, or they try, or they portray themselves as representing holiness, and they are not. So these are some of the lessons to be learned, important lessons. I thought we would share. We're gonna conclude over here. We're coming up to Hanukkah. Hanukkah is a wonderful holiday. There's so much that's being done here at Chabad Coral Springs. If you don't have a menorah, please, we have many menorahs to give away. For those who don't have a menorah, there's Hanukkah events. Look up on the different postings on social media, wherever it might be. We hope for you to join us in many of these events. And so have a wonderful Hanukkah, a wonderful week. Hinei lo yanum v'lo yishan, Shomer Yisrael, the guardian of Israel, does not slumber nor sleep. Have a fantastic week.